Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is July 17th. On this day in 1918, just after midnight, a royal family was quietly led into a basement under the pretense of being moved. Moments later, gunfire erupted, and the world not only lost a Tsar, but a dynasty. The murder of Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, their 5 children, and their 4 loyal attendants was more than just a political act. It was a symbol of revolution and the brutal end of Imperial Russia. Today, we're walking through the fall of the Romanovs, the grim events of that night, and the mystery, myth, and legacy that have followed ever since. Let's get started. By the early 20th century, the Romanov dynasty had ruled Russia for more than 300 years. Nicholas II took the throne in 1894, inheriting an empire brimming with wealth and unrest. A deeply religious man, Nicholas loved his family dearly. But as a ruler, many considered him to be detached and inflexible. He was someone who truly believed that he had a divine right to rule. While the imperial family enjoyed a life of palaces and pageantry, the Russian people faced poverty, famine, and political repression. In 1905, after Russia's loss in the Russo-Japanese War, protests erupted. On Bloody Sunday, unarmed protesters were gunned down by imperial guards. It was a turning point that shattered the image of the Tsar as a benevolent father figure. Nicholas attempted reforms, including the creation of the Duma, a legislative body, but he dissolved it multiple times, refusing to relinquish control. Then came World War I. Russia entered the war unprepared. Soldiers lacked weapons, and supplies were scarce. Millions died. In 1915, Nicholas took personal command of the military, leaving the government in the hands of his wife, Alexandra. She turned to a mystic, Grigory Rasputin, who had claimed to heal their son Alexei's hemophilia. Rasputin's influence and the scandal surrounding him only worsened the monarchy's image. In 1917, the dam finally broke. The February Revolution swept through the country. Nicholas was forced to abdicate, ending more than 3 centuries of Romanov rule. His brother refused the crown, and just like that, Russia's royal chapter was closed. Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and young Alexei were placed under house arrest. As revolution gave way to civil war, the family was moved across Russia under increasing secrecy and surveillance. They were eventually moved to Tobolsk in Siberia and later to the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg, a fortified residence ominously referred to as the House of Special Purpose. There, they were guarded by Bolsheviks under the command of Yakov Yurovsky. By July 1918, the Romanovs had been prisoners for over a year. In the Ipatiev house, they lived under constant guard. Windows were painted over, and their movements were restricted. The White Army, opposed to the Bolsheviks, was approaching Yekaterinburg, and the Bolsheviks feared a royal rescue. Then, in the late hours of July 16th, the order came down: eliminate the Romanovs. At about 11:30 p.m. on July 16th, Yurovsky, the local commander, told Nicholas that his family would be moved for their safety. The Romanovs dressed quickly. They were escorted to a basement room. Nicholas and Alexandra sat. Alexei, weak and sickly, was seated beside them. Their daughters stood behind, along with their loyal attendants. Then, Yurovsky entered the room with a squad of armed men. He read a short statement. Quote, "Your relatives have tried to save you. They have failed. We must now shoot you." End quote. Before Nicholas could respond, he was shot in the chest. The room erupted into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off of walls. The daughters were wearing corsets lined with hidden jewels and were partly shielded, but they were ultimately killed with bayonets and close-range shots. The massacre took 20 minutes. The murders were chaotic, messy, and traumatic even for the executioners. One reportedly became so overwhelmed that he ran out of the room, unable to continue. The bodies were then wrapped in sheets and loaded into a truck. The remains were mutilated with acid and buried in a shallow grave deep in the woods. Alexei and one daughter were buried separately. The Soviet government remained quiet. Officially, only Nicholas had been executed, and for decades the world would wonder what really happened in that basement. News of the Tsar's death was released the next day, but the fate of Alexandra and the children wasn't mentioned. Soviet officials spread misinformation, and rumors swirled. Had some survived? Could Anastasia have escaped? In the absence of answers, stories grew. Imposters came forward, including the famous Anna Anderson, who claimed to be Anastasia. Her story captured global attention, though DNA would later disprove it. Meanwhile, the truth was buried, literally. The grave was unknown. The Ipatiev house was eventually demolished in 1977 to erase its dark past. But history, it has a way of resurfacing. In 1979, amateur Russian researchers secretly found the Romanovs' burial site, guided by accounts from Yurovsky's own memoirs. But it wasn't until after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 that the remains were officially exhumed. They found 9 bodies, bones, bullet fragments, and clothing. The remains were analyzed using advanced forensic and DNA testing, including comparisons with living relatives like Prince Philip of the UK. 5 of the Romanovs were positively identified, along with their 4 attendants. But 2 were missing. Then, in 2007, another grave was found nearby. It held the charred remains of 2 young people. Forensic tests later confirmed that the remains belonged to Alexei and one of his sisters, likely Maria, although debate persists over which daughter was buried with him. In 2008, the Russian government officially declared that all 11 victims had been found and positively identified. Further confirmation came from advanced mitochondrial DNA sequencing, which verified the entire family's identities beyond any reasonable doubt. In total, more than a dozen international laboratories participated in the testing, making the Romanov case one of the most thoroughly investigated historical identifications in forensic science history. After nearly a century, all 11 victims had been officially accounted for. The Romanov mystery had finally been solved. But before that, in 1998, 80 years after their murder, the Romanovs were reburied with full honors in St. Petersburg's Peter and Paul Cathedral. Then, in 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church canonized the family as passion bearers, those who suffer with grace. Today, pilgrimage sites draw thousands. A monastery now stands at Ganina Yama, where the first grave was dug. People light candles, lay flowers, and whisper prayers for a family once reviled, but who is now revered. The Romanovs' deaths mark the end of Russia's imperial age and the brutal birth of its Soviet future. But more than that, they left behind questions that linger about power and the price of revolution. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found the Romanov story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!